Thank you very much, Ulf, and welcome back on stage. I'm going to give you a table here, Mo. I would just start with probably perhaps the silliest of questions is kind of the sports journalist question: how does it feel, or are you worried? I was reading only this morning that arrests among opposition leaders in Hong Kong are racking up, and there was a secret network helping to exfiltrate people who were targeted. Do you feel worried? And I will answer a little bit, because I felt worried that we were mailing and you didn't answer in 4 or 5 days, and I had the serious question: Are you under arrest? Luckily, you weren't. You're here with us today. But do you feel that this is affecting the termination of the movement?
Right. But I think I am not very much worried. Well, sometimes I do. But then when I look at the protesters who go to the front line, 60, 70-year-old who have to stand up and stop the police from hitting the kids. And I know some kids, 14-year-old or even younger, they have to write their last words and put it in the bag when they go to protest. I mean, there's nothing that you can fear. Well, I would say this is a war in a form or another, but this is definitely a war that the Hong Kong government has started to us, and by using paramilitary police to crack down on us and all these means of violence, and people start to fight back, and I think my job is actually very easy when comparing with these people who take to the street and being beaten up. How much courage do they have to take up to do all these jobs? So I think, well, this will not stop me. This will not stop anyone from Hong Kong, because if we can't defend our home, Hong Kong will only become, as Ulf said, one of the provinces or of the cities, which we don't want to pass on to our next generation.
And in your hope for the future, you mentioned partly the yellow economy, but also the Magnitsky bills. And we just saw a flash this afternoon that it seems to have passed the EU Foreign Ministers Council. We don't have any details, not speculate on that. But what do you see kind of from the ground? What is effective from us from the outside? What helps you, really? That was my question.
Right. I would say being vocal is already an easier way to support Hong Kong already. Sometimes we've been told by politicians like, yeah, you get only vocal support, blah, 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 in the past few years. But I mean, this time, during this movement, sometimes we don't even get vocal support. I mean, so you can see how much China is putting pressure on you. And I think it's not just Hong Kong that needs to resist China, it's also the whole world, Sweden, the EU, against China's, expansion of economic imperialism. Because I think being vocal is fundamental human rights to express your support and your opinion. And if this cannot even happen on the national level, on a regular basis, like the whole EU will be silent, then it's definitely something dangerous that's coming to Europe. Because one day, when human rights violations happens among your European citizens, your companies and your country, your government will not be able to speak up for you.
Yeah, and Ulf, when you talk with colleagues around the world, is there anyone you see that, I mean, how to handle China has come up on basically every European state's top agenda. Is there any state you're seeing doing it particularly well that we can learn from? And you mentioned EU unity, which is a critical precondition. Is it possible to get there? I think Portugal, 85%, 90% of their telecom business is owned by China, for instance, just take one example. Can we get there? How do we get there?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky question. Yes and no. I mean, obviously, no individual normal-sized country could actually do that. At least not in the developed world with all these commercials and other globalized connections to China. I think there are a few good signs. I think actually the US attitude is a good sign. I know there are thousands of reasons to distrust the kind of tweet-driven foreign policy in the US. Last time I went to the Stockholm China Forum, I think the most common starting remark was, "I basically don't agree with Mr. Trump, but." That was the normal kind of starting point for. So I think they have at least put up a strategy that at least is the best I could think of right now. In Europe, I would say Germany is basically being vocal and being long-term strategic. We have a lot of problems in Europe as well. We have the 17+1 cooperation. I mean, this is enormous. A lot of dangers in that, and we have single countries that rely on investment so heavily they simply don't want to raise their voice, and we have all these. I mean, these kind of very obvious, well, the harbor imperial is normally mentioned as the prime one, but all these kind of disunities in Europe. But I think the EU-US long-term unity is the only way to handle it.
I will open up the floor for little questions here. We have one from Jerker, and let's see, can we get a microphone, perhaps? There we go.
I can start off slowly.
I think it's better if you have a microphone.
Thank you. Very interesting presentations. My name is Jerker Hellström. I head the Asia and Middle East program at the Swedish Defense Research Agency. I focus on China. My question is relating to a list that I created on Twitter with all the Chinese diplomats around the world, now numbering 70 plus accounts. And it's very interesting to go through what they're tweeting about. And three of the main issues that I would say are related in some way are 5G and Huawei's exclusion from some markets. It's Hong Kong and it's Xinjiang. And why they're connected is because the narrative that is being pushed is that the US is behind all of these three, excluding Huawei, fomenting protest in Hong Kong, and describing Xinjiang as a human rights issue rather than a counterterrorism issue. So in terms of Hong Kong and the idea that there's a US black hand behind the protests, to what extent do you feel that this idea has actually taken root, that people believe in it in some parts of the world, and how to counter that narrative? Thank you.
Right. I've been talking to activists in Ukraine and in Russia. And when we talk about the Chinese accusation of the US behind Hong Kongers, they cracked up, because it's the same thing, that the authoritarian regimes will tell everyone about it. And you only have to experience fighting back of authoritarianism, and then you will understand all what it's about. Within Hong Kong, generally, people don't believe it. In the whole world, we've been trying to tell people, to get interviews, to be vocal, to get all the news out. And I think in the Western world, or in a more free world, people tend not to believe this. But I think in China, many people, they are fed with fake news. And I think that's also one of the very important factors, because they are the huge population in the world. Which I think is very important. But then I think China will not is not able to control everything, because eventually there's like a firewall, there's a VMP, people coming out of the firewall, Great Firewall to read news, and there are some uprisings in China. So I think for the long run, people will not believe in this. And I think it's very important to educate people, because the same thing repeated in the whole history. many times the US is behind, the US is behind, the US is behind, which I mean, in the future, if people tell me US is behind this, I would probably connect this with China and Russia, you know.
Very, very briefly, just to add on, I think obviously in mainland China there is absolutely a very big support for that. If they have any idea, they have that idea. That's bad enough, but it's very hard to do something about that. We cannot simply put up alternative news media stations in mainland China. I think more worrying in the long term is what's happening among expat Chinese students, business people in other countries, not least in countries where we have big communities, which is good for many reasons, for research, for business and for other reasons, but seem to be quite many clashes. We have seen clashes in university campuses, for example. What are you allowed to say? We have that discussion going on even in the West on what are you allowed to say on university campuses. But this is a very nasty kind of nationalistic. People claim that we should be very especially careful on criticizing China. Universities that believe that we have so many foreign students here, for example. We have institutions being financed from these Confucius institutes, for example. So there are many things that I think that the free societies should be very, very careful in becoming dependent and not being able to stand up. In that sense, they are right about the U.S. U.S. with all its kind of its faults, at least they stand behind the liberal, the free society's right to express itself.
No, that is a crucial point. But and I'm happy to add in the NBA as a big NBA fan. How quickly the NBA actually bowed down after only one general manager retweeted one tweet in support of Hong Kong. 3 hours later, it was gone, and China is, disbanded broadcasting, etc. And I think that's just underlying our vulnerability.
And the Cathay Pacific, the CEO of Cathay Pacific, it took for 24 hours to remove him.
And to perhaps a little bit more narrow question, but still, we're in Sweden, and on the 13th of December, if I'm not misremembering, we're supposed to approve or at least debate the new Swedish-China strategy. Do you see that this sets out guidelines how to kind of balance economic, ideological, and real political interest, and or if it's not perfect, what else would you want to have there?
Since I fight the government in so many other aspects right now, I'm going to be diplomatic in this one. The good thing is that we are actually finally discussing China in a more comprehensive way. That's a good thing, actually. I think we are late, and the business community have been doing that much longer. Sometimes over-optimistically, but now more realistically. So that's a good thing. Perhaps the bad thing is it is not a strategy. We're going to have a discussion Friday, I think, on a China strategy, which is a decent description of what's going on in China right now. That's a good starting point, but that does not create a strategy. So ask me after the discussion in Parliament, and you should perhaps be a little modest anyway in Sweden. You have to realize we have to raise our voice. We have to stand firm, not to show any kind of uncertainty. On the other hand, we have to realize that the Swedish voice has to be connected to the European voice. That's absolutely necessary.
Well, Björn had a question as well. I'm just going to public service announcements. We're going to cut a couple of minutes early because Ulf will participate in Studio 1, which I'm sure most of you will listen to anyways. So, Björn.
I'm going to keep it short. My name is Björn Weigel. I would like for you to expand a little bit on the relationship between Hong Kong and mainland China, because you have students in mainland China as well, and I would suspect that you are in connecting with them. So if you could, is there any chance of a spillover effect? Because in any way you see this is of course a big incident for Hong Kong, but this is actually it's a potential catastrophe for China, as if this spills over into mainland China. So, and the way you could read this is that the Chinese are really playing defense now, trying to make sure that you don't have any spillover effect into mainland China. So if you could expand on whatever is happening, what we cannot see in this regard, that would be interesting to know.
We'll take another question from Birgitta straight away before we get to answers. Frida? Yeah.
Yes, I'm wondering, is it correct that the elite has sent their kids out of Hong Kong?
The latest?
The elite, that they have sent their kids out?
Oh, right. Right.
Yep, feel free, Mo.
Sorry, I missed the first question. I missed the word Hong Kong and China were relationship.
How word is mainland China for the protest among students, etc.? Will it be a spillover? That's kind of how I understood it. Yeah.
Right. I think for a long time, Hong Kong has tried to avoid any cooperation, or some kind of, they try to disconnect with China. And I think this protest is very successful in terms of connecting people. So we are connected to ethnic minorities, mainly from India or Pakistani backgrounds in Hong Kong, and LGBTs, everyone, even mainland Chinese who live in Hong Kong. They are vocal. They gather as a group to protest and tell people that there are some mainland Chinese who support Hong Kong. With the spillover effect, we think China is trying very hard to prevent that from happening. And since Hong Kong and China, we don't have a very strong connection. Some more experienced, I would say, some veterans, they have been doing such jobs in China. But then kind of all the movements have been cracked down in China. So we are not very optimistic of this effect happening very soon. But then this is also something that we are hoping for, not just in Europe, not just in the US, Australia, but also in some other countries, Africa, or probably in China, because in China, they are the victims of authoritarianism. And as long as the people come to realize what has been happening there, which is very difficult because they've been brainwashed for their whole lives. But then this is very good point raised by you, and we definitely want that to happen. And second question is elites sent to foreign countries. It's not just Hong Kong, it's also in mainland China. I don't have the figure now, but I think some very close relatives of Xi Jinping, they either have like a UK passport or the US citizenship, and in Hong Kong as well. Carrie Lam herself, or Teresa Chen, our Secretary for Justice. Like recently, there's a rumor that she wanted to resign, and she wants to stay in the UK. In first place, she has to have a UK citizenship, and that's the case in Hong Kong. People don't trust Hong Kong's education system and everything. They simply want to get power and money and obeying China, and in the end, they will move to the US or to the UK. So that's correct.
I think the question also was, are they now starting to move the kids that are in Hong Kong now? Are they starting to take them? Have they seen so much protest that they start taking the kids who have been in Hong Kong?
Oh, you mean the elites, not the government officials?
No.
I'll say, well, in general, there are a lot of people trying to find a safe place. So even my friends, some of them will try to secure the future of the kids, like moving to Taiwan. So I'm not surprised, but I don't think there's a general huge discussion of the elites sending their kids to overseas, because that has been happening every year. So, yeah.
To simplify, I would say from the open door policies and onwards, Hong Kong has been influencing mainland China for the last, not 10 years, but since 2012 or something. China has been influencing Hong Kong. The other way around. Hong Kong is mainly a problem right now for mainland China for many different reasons. What you are doing is obviously a problem, not because of the spillover, because it doesn't. There is hardly any spillover at all. If you go to neighboring provinces and neighboring parts of China, I would say very, very little. The main problem is concerned kind of other countries, the relation to other countries, I would say, is a major one. Hong Kong finance is not a problem for China, but it could be a problem for China, depending on what's going to happen. I think I can judge this. People try to judge whether, obviously, Hong Kong economy is much lesser part of the mainland China today than it used to be 20 years ago. On the other hand, in pure business and finance, it's still an important place. It's one of the world's biggest marketplaces. If you think it's important to have a convertible currency, if you think it's important to have a marketplace which is under rule of law, then Hong Kong provides something you cannot get from Shenzhen or from Shanghai. The optimists, at least from mainland China perspective, they think that Shanghai and Shenzhen could actually take over that. In Singapore, they do not think that. That was the only reason for some kind of local optimism that they could gain from that. Otherwise, they were extremely loyal to the sake of Hong Kong.
Yeah, we had during an expert panel here a couple of months ago, the figure 70% of the foreign direct investment is coming through Hong Kong. We have...
Sorry, just to compliment with one...
We have a final remark opportunity for you, Mo.
Please.
No, sorry, as Ulf mentioned, well, Hong Kong is also very important to China in terms of money laundering. It's not just economy. As you know, when you trade in China, you can't really possibly get money out of China. So the only way to do it is through money laundering. And the second biggest city in the whole world for money laundering for China is, I think it's Virgin Island in the UK. In the first place is Hong Kong. So for many reasons, China cannot lose Hong Kong.
I think I have around 11 more questions, but I know both Ulf and Mo has bigger fights to fight than
other fights.
Other fights to fight. But as a token of our appreciation, we have a little something over here. But let's thank our speakers for a round of warm applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.